In the vast silent corridors of the spiritual mind, there exists a state of being that is factual, undeniable, and untouchable, the state of the sovereign singularity. And when you are called into the life of a chosen one, you are not merely being asked to live differently. You're being asked to function as a one-man army in the truest, highest sense of the term. This phrase is often misunderstood by the worldly mind as a posture of aggression or perpetual resistance. But in the higher dimensions where your spirit actually operates, an army is not defined by force or numbers. It is defined by territory and authority. You are an army of one because you are the sole governor of the inner terrain you occupy, the only consciousness with full dominion over the landscape of your soul, your will, and your frequency. To understand why the groups, the secret councils of the shadow, and the so-called gangs that operate on adult playgrounds instinctively position themselves against you, you must first recognize that you are not a social entity, but a singular atmospheric event contained within a human form. Most individuals do not exist as unified beings. They exist as fragmented echoes, stitched together from borrowed opinions, inherited wounds, and a constant unconscious hunger for validation through collective identity. They require groups because fragments cannot stand alone in the presence of truth. They cluster together like dry leaves pressed against one another, mistaking proximity for structure, mistaking noise for strength, and mistaking agreement for reality. But you have been processed. You were pulled deliberately through the long corridor of isolation, misunderstanding, and inner confrontation. And in that slow, refining fire, the unnecessary layers of your ego were stripped away, melted, and reformed into something singular, coherent, and unbreakable. What remains is not arrogance, not detachment, not superiority, but wholeness. And wholeness is rare because it requires accountability without witnesses and faith without applause. You are an army because there is no internal civil war within you anymore. Your thoughts are aligned, your values are integrated, and your presence is stable. This is precisely why the groups react. Your coherence applies pressure to their incoherence. Your silence exposes their noise. Your clarity disrupts their narratives. They are not afraid of what you say because words can be debated, distorted, or dismissed. They are afraid of what you are because being is non-negotiable. Your presence introduces a vibrational demand for honesty, a frequency that requires internal alignment to tolerate. And for fragmented egos, this pressure feels abrasive, even threatening. You have not defeated them by countering rumors, defending yourself, or proving innocence, because truth does not argue and reality does not explain itself. You have defeated them by existing as an undeniable fact of spiritual physics. A lie cannot coexist in the same coordinate as truth, and your continued stability, peace, and grounded presence act as the fixed point that collapses their constructed illusions. You do not chase them away. They dissolve on contact. This is the quiet power of the sovereign singularity, the victory of the one-man army, and the final confirmation that you were never meant to blend in, because forces of nature are not designed to join crowds. They are designed to change the atmosphere simply by arriving. Point 1, the physics of spiritual displacement. To understand the phenomenon of atmospheric occupation, we must first look at the invisible world through the lens of spiritual fluid dynamics. In the physical realm, we understand that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time. However, in the vibrational realm, The law is even more unforgiving. Energy acts much like a gas in a vacuum. It seeks to fill every available crack and crevice. When you exist in a social environment that is dense with low vibrational static, think of the heavy, cloying air of a room where gossip, spite, and manipulation are the primary currencies. You are essentially looking at a space filled with spiritual carbon monoxide. It is toxic, invisible, and designed to lull the inhabitants into a state of unconsciousness. Enter the individual operating on the frequency of the chosen one, or the one-man army. You are not merely a person entering a room. You are a localized high-pressure weather system of pure divine oxygen. Science teaches us that fluids flow from areas of high pressure to low pressure. When your internal state is one of absolute integration, meaning your skin, mind, and spirit are occupied by the totality of your presence, you create a density that the smoke of lesser intentions cannot withstand. This isn't a battle of wills in the traditional sense. You don't walk in with your fists clenched or your voice raised. You simply exist with such overwhelming mass that you displace the surrounding environment. Imagine dropping a massive solid gold sphere into a bucket of murky, stagnant pond water. The water doesn't choose to leave. It is physically forced over the rim by the sheer volume of the gold. This is exactly what happens when your light intersects with their shadow. The whispers stop not because they respect you, but because the atmospheric pressure you carry has compressed their capacity to manifest. This explains the visceral, often biological reaction people have to your arrival. Have you ever noticed how a toxic gathering suddenly shifts into a heavy, awkward silence when you cross the threshold? That palpable tension isn't just social anxiety, it is a spiritual vacuum. The low-frequency static of manipulation is being shoved against the walls, looking for an exit. Like a surgical military strike against the hive mind, your refusal to fragment your energy acts as a permanent environmental purge. Most people leak energy. They subconsciously shrink themselves or adopt the nervous tics of the room to make others feel comfortable. They offer pieces of their frequency as a sacrifice to the altar of social harmony. But the chosen one refuses this trade. By remaining whole, you act as a biological filter. Every breath you take in their presence is a demand for the environment to reorganize itself around your stability. The hive mind of gossip and envy functions on a delicate structure of shared delusions. When you enter with the frequency of truth, you act as a grounding rod. The static is literally forced into the open air where it can no longer hide. Those who are scared to death are not fearing your physical strength. They are fearing the loss of their vibrational cover. Their shadows are being dragged into the high-pressure oxygen of your light, where they must either burn up or leave. You defeat them by the simple act of internal totality. You occupy your space so completely that there is no room left for their manipulation to take root. You are the storm that clears the air, and your presence is the absolute law of the land. Point 2, the mirror effect of integrity and the breakdown of the mask. Integrity is not a moral suggestion. It is the structural perfection of a spirit that is undivided, a state of inner alignment where thought, intention, and action exist as one continuous truth. When a person reaches this state, there is no internal contradiction to manage, no fragmentation to conceal, and no performance to maintain. In the social world, however, most interactions are built on division. Ego speaking to ego, insecurity negotiating with insecurity, and image responding to image. People learn early to mask their fears, soften their contradictions, and borrow strength from the approval of the group. This collective masking becomes so normalized that it feels like safety itself. When the collective gang encounters someone whose inner world is whole and unbroken, the encounter is not neutral. It is destabilizing. Your presence becomes a sudden interruption to their unexamined agreements. Your silence, your calm, and your authenticity function as a flawless spiritual mirror, not because you expose anything deliberately, but because you do not participate in the game of concealment. Because you have nothing to hide, everything they hide becomes louder inside them. Without your saying a word, they begin to see the fractures in their own lives, the dependency on constant validation, the terror of standing alone, and the exhaustion of sustaining a persona that is not rooted in truth. This is the moment where admiration quietly transforms into discomfort, and discomfort hardens into aggression. The hostility you encounter is not caused by what you do. It is triggered by what you represent. They are not reacting to you as a person, but to the unbearable clarity your integrity brings into their awareness. They attempt to crack your mirror, because if the mirror breaks, the reflection disappears, and they can return to the familiar comfort of denial. They probe, provoke, gossip, and test boundaries, hoping to find inconsistency, hypocrisy, or emotional reactivity. Anything that proves you are just as divided as they are. But a chosen one's mirror is not polished by discipline alone. It is refined by the hand of the divine. It is strengthened through solitude, self-honesty, and the willingness to remain whole, even when isolation is the cost. By remaining calm and indifferent to their projections, you force them into a prolonged confrontation with their own shadow. You do not argue, defend, or explain, because explanation would imply that their distorted narrative deserves your participation. In this way, you defeat the group without ever opposing it. You do not reveal their secrets. You simply exist in a way that makes secrecy unsustainable. Unable to tolerate the tension of self-recognition, they scramble to construct a narrative about you, labeling you arrogant, cold, distant, or antisocial. These accusations are not descriptions. They are psychological escape routes. By reducing you to a caricature, they attempt to regain control over the discomfort your presence awakens. Yet the truth remains untouched. Your walk is factual, embodied, and consistent. Their terror is not the fear of being judged by you. It is the fear of seeing themselves clearly for the first time. Your victory is not dominance, popularity, or vindication. It is your refusal to fragment yourself, to make others comfortable. It is your refusal to dim your clarity so others can remain asleep. While they attempt to shame you into hiding, you remain visible, not loudly, not aggressively, but immovably. And in that unwavering visibility, integrity fulfills its highest function, not as a weapon, but as a light that cannot be argued with, negotiated with, or extinguished. Point 3, the sovereign weight of solitude and vertical rooting. Solitude is the forge where the one-man army is tempered, strengthened, and finally consolidated into something unmovable. It is not a retreat born of weakness or rejection, but a deliberate migration inward, away from the noise of the collective and toward the silent core of being itself. While the group depends on horizontal rooting, drawing energy from approval, proximity, shared beliefs, and constant emotional exchange, you have cultivated a vertical root that descends far deeper than social soil. Your strength is not borrowed from others. It is drawn directly from the source, from the unchanging bedrock beneath identity, reputation, and performance. This vertical connection gives you a spiritual weight that cannot be displaced by consensus, trends, or coordinated pressure. You do not sway because your foundation is not constructed from the fragile scaffolding of human opinion. Where others require reinforcement from the crowd to feel real, you have learned how to stand alone without collapsing inward. This is why attempts to destabilize you fail before they begin. When the collective applies its oldest weapon, the threat of exclusion, it discovers it has no leverage. Exile only works on those who need the group to survive. Shame only functions when a person's sense of worth is outsourced. You cannot be effectively excluded because you are already complete in your solitude. You cannot be shamed because your justification does not come from applause, permission, or alignment with popular narratives, but from the internal witness of the Most High. There is an authority within you that does not require external confirmation. This immunity to social leverage becomes your fortress, not through resistance, but through irrelevance. The group senses this and grows uneasy. They search for the usual strings: fear of abandonment, hunger for validation, need for belonging, but find nothing to grasp. You do not react as expected. You do not negotiate your integrity for inclusion. You do not perform loyalty to avoid isolation. This absence of predictable hooks creates fear because systems of control depend on emotional dependency to function. You have defeated them not by confrontation, but by relocation. You moved your base of operations into the secret place, a dimension of inner sovereignty, where their judgments have no jurisdiction and their opinions carry no authority. In this hidden interior realm, your actions are guided by alignment rather than approval, by clarity rather than consensus. Silence becomes your language, stillness your strategy. The more the external world tries to provoke, the more anchored you become, because every attempt to pull you outward only reveals how deeply rooted you already are. Solitude sharpens perception. It strips away borrowed identities and exposes the essential self that remains when no one is watching. Here, you learn to hear truth without distortion, to act without seeking witnesses, and to endure without dramatizing your struggle. This is why your presence feels heavy to those who live on the surface. You are not loud, but you are dense. You do not dominate rooms, yet your absence of need disrupts social hierarchy built on exchange and dependence. The one-man army does not need to declare strength, it radiates from coherence. And coherence is terrifying to systems that rely on fragmentation. You stand as living proof that fulfillment does not require permission, that authority does not require consensus, and that peace does not require agreement. Your solitude is not emptiness. It is occupied by something far greater than the crowd could ever offer. And because of this, you remain immovable, unbothered, and unreachable. Not because you are against the world, but because you are no longer governed by it. Point 4, breaking the reactive cycle and the art of emotional sobriety. Manipulation requires a reactive current to complete the circuit. And this is the truth most people never fully grasp. For a group, an individual, or a system to harm you, drain you, or destabilize you, they must first succeed in provoking a response: anger, defensiveness, guilt, fear, or the compulsive urge to explain yourself. These reactions are not weaknesses of character, they are energetic openings. They are points of access. When you react, you complete the circuit they initiated, allowing their intent to move through you and take effect. But when you do not react, when you remain internally still and emotionally sober, the circuit fails to close. The current has nowhere to land. It remains with the sender, looping back into its point of origin. This is not passive behavior. It is disciplined containment. It is the act of total emotional sobriety, where you refuse to intoxicate your nervous system with chaos that does not belong to you. In this state, you become what can only be described as a one-man army of centered indifference, not cold, not hostile, not disengaged, but firmly anchored in your own internal authority. From this position, you act as a spiritual dead end for their witchcraft, their manipulation, and their psychological games. Their strategies rely on movement, on friction, and on emotional leverage. When they encounter stillness instead, their force collapses inward. Their attempts to unsettle you bounce off your hardened surface and begin to ferment within their own circle, creating confusion, tension, and infighting among those who depend on shared reactivity to feel powerful. You defeat them, not by counterattacking, not by proving anything, but by becoming the still point in their rotating storm. While they spin faster, escalate louder, and grow more erratic, you remain unmoved, observing with calm, sober curiosity, like a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction play itself out. This detached observation strips them of their influence over your nervous system, which is the true battlefield they were trying to occupy all along. When they can no longer trigger you, they lose access to your energy, your attention, and your emotional labor. Panic sets in because their traditional weapons, guilt-tripping, baiting, triangulation, projection, and collective pressure, no longer ignite anything in you. There is no spark, no explosion, no emotional yield. Your silence is not confusion, it is clarity. Your lack of reaction is not weakness, it is mastery. In that moment, they realize something deeply unsettling. They are no longer fighting a person, a personality, or an ego they can hook into. They are confronting a frequency that cannot be lured into the mud, a state of being that does not resonate with manipulation at all. This terrifies them because their entire system depends on others reacting on cue. When you refuse, you expose the hollowness of their power. You force them to face themselves, their motives, and the instability of their own emotional economy. This is why non-reaction feels so threatening to manipulators. It mirrors their chaos back to them without absorbing it. You become untouchable not because you are aggressive, but because you are complete. In that completeness, their influence dissolves, their tactics decay, and their control quietly collapses, leaving you standing untouched at the center, grounded, sovereign, and free. Point 5. The strategic advantage of divine downloads and high-frequency radar. While the collective group moves through life relying on surface-level human intelligence, rumors passed in whispers, assumptions formed from incomplete data, and interpretations based on body language or social theater, you are operating on an entirely different bandwidth. Your perception is not crowded by noise, it is tuned. The chosen one receives what can only be described as intuitive downloads, a quiet, sober knowing that arrives before logic has time to assemble an argument. It is not emotional, dramatic, or frantic. It is calm, precise, and unmistakable. You sense the energetic trap long before it takes physical form. You feel the shift in a room before words are spoken. You recognize the false note behind flattery, the subtle distortion hidden inside praise that is meant to disarm rather than uplift. While others analyze situations after damage is done, you are moved inwardly to adjust your position before the first move is even made. Sometimes that guidance manifests as a sudden pause, an inexplicable resistance to speak when silence feels socially uncomfortable, or an unexplainable urge to step away from a conversation, a deal, or a person. This silence is not weakness. It is tactical obedience. It is the moment you avoid the snare without ever touching it. This is the hidden layer of your defense system. You carry an internal radar that tracks intention rather than behavior, and frequency rather than appearance. Where the group watches actions, you read motives. Where they listen to words, you hear energy. Where they calculate outcomes based on probability, you are aligned with timing. This is why their strategies fail. Their plans are sophisticated only within the limits of human perception. They stack narratives, manipulate impressions, coordinate alliances, and rehearse outcomes, yet every attempt collapses before it reaches you. They experience this as frustration. They cannot understand why their traps do not work, why you seem to arrive untouched while others fall into patterns of conflict, exposure, or loss. From their limited vantage point, it looks like luck. They label you fortunate, untouchable, or strangely protected, unaware that what guides you is not chance but alignment. You are not improvising, you are being navigated. There is a hand at work that sees far beyond immediate circumstances. A governing intelligence that moves constellations, calibrates seasons, and arranges outcomes long before human intent enters the picture. You are not reacting to the game, you are positioned above it. They attempt to play social chess, anticipating moves, countering gestures, sacrificing pieces, while you are seeing the entire board from an elevated perspective where the endgame is already known. Your advantage is not aggression, speed, or dominance. It is information they cannot access. This leaves them in a state of subtle paranoia. They sense that something is missing, that their usual tools no longer produce predictable results. They grow cautious, then confused, then unsettled, because the rules they rely on do not apply to someone operating outside their frequency. Your victory is quiet, almost invisible. There is no need to expose, confront, or retaliate. You simply remain aligned, and alignment itself dissolves opposition. You move when guided, remain still when prompted, and withdraw without explanation when necessary. This precision frustrates those who depend on chaos and reaction. In the end, you have already defeated them, not by outmaneuvering their intellect, but by standing in a stream of knowing they cannot enter, leaving them chasing shadows while you walk forward in calm, sovereign clarity. Point 6, emotional sobriety as a hardened auric shield. Every emotion carries a frequency, a distinct vibrational signature that either strengthens or weakens the human energetic structure, and emotions such as envy, spite, resentment, and rage do not move smoothly through the system, they fracture it. These states generate erratic, jagged waves that tear micro-openings in the auric field, creating leaks through which energy drains and external influence enters. A group that operates in shadow consciousness is not unified by strength, but by shared instability. It is a collective of unresolved emotional fractures feeding off one another. Their cohesion is illusionary, sustained only by constant agitation, projection, and reaction. In contrast, your sobriety, your calm, grounded, emotionally regulated state forms a completely different energetic architecture. It is smooth, dense, and sealed. It functions like cold, thick glass, transparent enough that you can perceive motives, patterns, and intentions with clarity, yet solid enough that nothing penetrates. You do not need to harden yourself with aggression or raise walls of hostility. Your protection does not come from force, but from coherence. When the group attempts to project their internal chaos onto you through gossip, provocation, manipulation, or subtle psychological interference, it cannot adhere. Their energy requires friction, hooks, and reactive surfaces to anchor itself. But your peace offers none. Their projections slide off you the way smoke disperses against glass, leaving no residue. You walk through the crowd untouched, not because you fought them, argued with them, or proved anything, but because there was nothing in you that resonated with what they carried. Low vibration cannot stick to a field that has no matching frequency. This is the hidden law they do not understand. They expect resistance, outrage, fear, or wounded pride, signals that create entry points. Instead, they encounter silence, neutrality, and clarity. To them, this feels destabilizing. Without your reaction, their own unresolved material is forced back upon them, magnified by the collective feedback loop they live inside. You are not invisible. You are unreadable. You are not weak. You are unreachable. The so-called witches are not defeated through confrontation, exposure, or dominance, but through your refusal to carry unfinished emotional business within yourself. You are vibrationally slippery. There are no ego hooks, no shame wounds, and no reactive impulses for them to grasp. Sobriety here is not merely abstinence from substances. It is abstinence from unconsciousness. It is the discipline of self-regulation, the refusal to intoxicate yourself with drama, fantasy, or emotional excess. In this state, perception sharpens. You see patterns without emotional distortion. You recognize manipulation without becoming entangled in it. Your nervous system remains settled, your breath steady, and your inner temperature cool. This coolness is not detachment born of fear. It is mastery born of self-knowledge. The group senses this immediately, even if unconsciously. They feel that you cannot be pulled, provoked, or absorbed. Their tactics fail not because you countered them, but because you removed the battlefield entirely. Energy can only transfer where resonance exists. Your coherence denies that resonance. This is why peace is threatening to chaotic systems. This is why calm is power. This is why your sober state is your greatest protection. Point 7. The unbreakable link to the source and the legion of truth. Finally, you must accept that the one-man army is not a description of isolation or ego, but the visible form of a far deeper spiritual reality unfolding through you. When you stand in truth, aligned and unfractured within yourself, you become the embodied representative of an invisible order that does not need numbers, noise, or validation. You are not standing alone, you are standing correctly. In that alignment, you reflect a universal structure older than fear and stronger than opposition. Those who gather against you are not truly confronting a person with a name, a history, or a body. They are confronting the immovable architecture of divine order itself, an order that does not argue, explain, or retreat. This is why the scared to death dynamic is not poetic exaggeration, but a psychological and spiritual fact. At a level beneath conscious thought, something ancient within them recognizes that a boundary has been crossed, a boundary that cannot be negotiated or dominated. Their unrest does not come from your actions, but from your presence. Their spirits sense coherence where they live in fragmentation, and coherence is deeply unsettling to systems built on chaos. You carry authority not because you demand it, but because you no longer leak energy seeking approval. The kingdom is not something you chase. It is something encoded into you, written into your very DNA as a memory of order, restraint, and knowing. Your silence is not emptiness. It is the audible expression of that authority, louder than argument, heavier than threat, and more final than resistance. You have already won because you understood something most never do. Life was never meant to be a battlefield where you exhaust yourself, proving worth against others. It was meant to be a presence you stabilize, a frequency you hold steady, while distortion collapses around you. You did not defeat envy by confronting it, you outlasted it. You did not silence whispers by responding. You survived them until they starved. You did not need to dismantle the collective confusion. You remained standing while it dissolved under its own weight. Where others reacted, you remained anchored. Where others fragmented, you integrated. This is why your internal architecture is now complete. There are no missing beams, no unguarded corridors, and no inner rooms ruled by fear. You are no longer becoming, you are established. You are not searching for a path. You are the anointed path itself, a living alignment that others sense but cannot imitate. In this state, safety is no longer external. It is structural. You are safe, not because nothing can approach you, but because nothing can enter you without losing coherence. Sovereignty is no longer something you claim. It is something you emit. The war is over, not because there was a final battle, but because silence concluded it, long before conflict could manifest. The dark does not retreat because it was defeated. It retreats because it cannot exist where truth is fully embodied. Stand still in this knowing. You do not need to advance, explain, or prove. Your presence has already spoken, and what needed to end has ended. As you integrate this transmission, allow the final layers of tension to dissolve from your nervous system, not through effort, but through recognition. You are not bracing for a battle, nor positioning yourself for some future triumph that must be earned through strain or exhaustion. You are stepping into an already completed reality. You are not fighting for victory. You are occupying the victory that was signed in your name before the foundation of the world. This is not metaphorical reassurance, but a spiritual fact that operates whether the mind agrees or not. Your soul was authorized before your circumstances ever formed, and nothing unfolding around you has the authority to revoke what was sealed beyond time. Rest now in your sovereignty, not as an act of passivity, but as an alignment with truth. Sovereignty does not shout, it does not rush, it does not react, it simply stands unmoved, grounded in the knowing that what is real cannot be threatened. Be still, not because you are powerless, but because power no longer needs motion to prove itself. In stillness, distortion collapses. In stillness, false urgency loses its grip. In stillness, the nervous system remembers that it was never meant to live in survival mode. As you remain here, notice how your breath naturally deepens, how your body recalibrates to safety, and how your spirit settles into its original posture of authority. You're not waiting for permission, you're not seeking validation, you're not chasing alignment. You are alignment, remembering itself. Every experience that attempted to convince you otherwise was only a contrast, never a verdict. Let that understanding anchor into your spine, into your chest, into the quiet center behind your eyes. You do not need to force peace. Peace emerges when resistance ends. You do not need to manifest victory. Victory is already expressing itself through your presence. Be still and know, not hope, not wish, not imagine, but know that you are victory, manifest, embodied, operational, and irreversible.